Welcome back to Probably Unlimited Games, where Matt discovered that IA scatter was never supposed to run during gameplay, but reading documentation is for suckers and losers who don't have ADHD. So, this week Matt started using my small house design to actually build out the town. After weeks of theoretical town planning and scattered test buildings, we've finally created an actual settlement that looks like people might live there. Except not really, because we have like 2 usable houses. So much for getting 1 done per week, I guess. He also started figuring out how to use splines to build fencing around the town. Splines are one of those features that sound straightforward. Just draw a line and put fence posts along it. But it seems like they have a bit more of a learning curve than Matthew expected. So, remember all of that performance testing that Matt did with IA Scatter last week? The mysterious FPS drops and the confusion about why smaller areas had the same cost as large ones? Well, it turns out he should have contacted the developer, but he didn't want to. Or read the manual, but he didn't want to, like he gets after me for. Instead, he figured out, on his own, that the tool is not supposed to be used at runtime. Turns out you use it in the editor. Generate your foliage placement, and then convert everything into static meshes or to actual foliage instances. So, the FPS drops came from the fact that we were using the tool wrong. Reading the documentation probably would have clarified this, but reading documentation is for people who don't have ADHD. He might have to redo some testing now that he understands how it's actually supposed to work, but at least now we know why the performance was so weird. Back in the open world, Matt added some harvestable logs back into the world. Simple enough, except the logs are apparently very high maintenance and need constant supervision. So, the problems were, they were spawning inside trees. They had randomized scale, which sometimes turned them into toothpicks. They were spawning underground, and there was an error about clearing empty arrays. So, he eventually figured out how to not make them spawn in trees, how to randomize the scale properly so they stopped being toothpicks, figured out how to keep them from spawning under the ground, and fixed the array error by making all the collectible trees always loaded. A temporary solution until we constantly stop moving them around. Sounds like lots of fun. But he did eventually get it figured out, so I guess that week we took off wasn't all bad. Matt also added the bed and town management book back into the new town. Apparently, these core systems got lost in the transition to the open world layout, so getting them back gives us our actual gameplay loop back. Speaking of the town, Matt and I apparently failed to communicate how we wanted this town to look. Matthew wanted to flatten the land and then use the same style house everywhere and create an efficient grid layout. I, on the other hand, was going to build the houses like the peasants of yore, each one individualized, interesting, and designed with the landscape in mind. Different sizes, different placements, and different arrangements. So, when Matthew looked over my shoulder and saw what kind of houses I was building, he apparently got kind of annoyed, which is a surprise, because I found out about this by reading this week's notes. It's like finding out your boss is mad at you over, like, Twitter or something. But it does explain why he was never particularly concerned with the number of houses I was actually getting done. If all he needed was 1, and then like a tavern on top of that, it didn't really matter how long it took as long as I got them done. Seeing me build all these weird, highly individualized houses must have come as a bit of a shock to him. But after thinking about it, Matt thinks he prefers the way I'm building the town. It makes the settlement look more unique, more interesting, and theoretically easier to navigate. Varied architecture and layout creates landmarks and character that make a town not only easy to remember, but hopefully actually memorable. So, I guess I'm going to keep making my wonky-ass houses, like this one. Why is it split level? Because I thought it was cool. Why does it have a balcony? Because it popped into my head when I was designing it. Why does it have an exit on the upper level? Because I thought that it would be interesting to give the player the option to exit directly into the forest, in case you don't want to talk to the townsfolk for whatever reason, like not succeeding on the hunt last time. So much for verisimilitude. I guess the lesson here is, bottle up your feelings and hope the situation resolves itself. Seriously, dude, I wouldn't have fought you on this one. But I guess it makes the navigation easier when everything doesn't look identical. So I guess progress comes in many forms, including just shutting up and I don't know, trusting your brother's artistic instinct, I guess. Steve and not Steve now have an actual town forming around them, made out of 2 buildings, complete with fences, varied architecture of 2 buildings, and logs that aren't toothpicks. They remain unimpressed, but they're always unimpressed. Anyway, like and subscribe. Maybe if we get enough likes on this video, Matthew will stop being annoyed with me.